Good evening again, everyone. It's Tuesday, March 11th, 2014, Community Redevelopment Agency Board meeting called to order at approximately 5:13. Roll call, Madam Clerk.
Board Member Maldonado. Board Member Burgess.
Here.
Vice Chairman Shelley.
Here.
Chairman Porter.
Here. Mr. Attorney, any additions, deletions?
No, sir.
Item 3 is the approval of minutes. Is there a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor? Tab 2. Mr. Attorney, Mr. Manager.
Sure. We have preliminary findings from our theater consultant. I just want to introduce Duncan Webb. Duncan and I have worked together in the past. Our first experience together was building a community theater in White Plains, New York. And then also in Fort Lauderdale, Duncan did some work for the Broward Performing Arts Center. Duncan is a very conservative guy, and I knew if we asked him to come down and take a look at it, he would give us the unvarnished truth. So I think what you're going to hear tonight is the unvarnished truth. He rushed really hard to get us at least some preliminary numbers so that you had an opportunity before May 13th to consider the implications of renovating the theater. So with that, Duncan, you have the floor, and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Thank you for inviting me here to share my work with you. As Mr. Gressett mentioned, I'm a management consultant to people who build, renovate, and operate theaters. I've spent the last 25 years roaming around mostly North America, working with cities, developers, arts organizations, and schools, thinking about and working on these buildings. We do these feasibility studies, business plans, and strategic plans to help communities and others make informed decisions about whether or not to go forward with projects like this. So I like to say that our job is to speak truth to power and then get out of the way. So our approach to this work, here as elsewhere, is to try and ask and answer 4 questions. Is there a potential audience demand for the renovated and reanimated Seminole Theater? So who lives here, who visits here, what do they like, what do they want, and is there propensity and capacity in the market to fill the theater for various types of events? Secondly, what's the nature and level of demand on the part of users? So who are the arts organizations, touring programs, educational programs that need and want something more than they currently have? And if you add all of that up, does it suggest that you'd have a busy building? The third question is, what's the supply of facilities already serving the market, and what's missing? So what are the gaps that the renovated Seminole Theater might fill? And then lastly, and very importantly for you all, from a broader perspective, what does the renovated Seminole Theater do for you as a community? How does it support your broader goals around things like economic development, downtown revitalization, and so on? I'd also stress that it's very important that you believe that we will say no when it's a bad idea. It's a very hard thing to do, to come into a community and sort of disagree with their desire to renovate or build a theater, but it's a critical part of our practice. It doesn't happen that often. In fact, what happens most of the time is we sort of gently move our client away from a presumed answer to one that we think is a better solution. So you have this wonderful old theater with a rich history, both as an active part of historic downtown Homestead at various points, and then it closed. You have partially renovated the theater with various sources of funding, and the question is, now what? It's a lovely building in good condition in this amazing location in downtown Homestead, so what should you do? Over the period of time, really just since 2008 in recent years, our thinking about these buildings has been evolving. It's no longer the soundbite we use is, it's no longer about Friday night lights, it's now about creating the community living room. So the old image you had of a theater where on Friday nights at 7 o'clock the marquee would light up and fancy people wearing their fancy clothes would show up for a fancy performance has been replaced by a new idea, which we call the community living room, that the building should basically be always open, inviting, compelling for anyone in the community, whether or not it's about a specific performance. So these images reflect those changes. It's more about public spaces, enhanced food and beverage services, the importance of education programs and buildings. But the old idea of the traditional performing arts and the popular arts is all, those boundaries no longer exist. If it's good, it's worthy of being on the stage. And then a very important trend away from building palaces of the arts towards the idea of arts districts, sort of developing a series of facilities within an urban core that drive economic development within the downtown area. So let's have a look at some of these issues, the basic issues in Homestead. These are things that you already know, but just to sort of for your referral and because they're important for us, this is a market with relatively lower levels of educational attainment. The blue bar is Homestead. Then we're showing both the 15-mile and the 30-mile radius in reference to the state and rest of the country. So lower levels of educational attainment, an extremely young population locally, but also within the 15-mile ring, relatively lower levels of household income in locally, but also again in those near rings, lower median household income. This one's also interesting because on this one we've separated the Homestead AFB, which is the top line by 2019. We pulled that out of the rest of the city of Homestead to highlight that city itself and the household income lower than the rest of the region around it. There are many people locally and in the rings around Homestead for whom Spanish is the language spoken at home, stressing the importance of that culture and cultural heritage, and the trend around ethnicity both locally and in the 15-mile radius is that group continues to grow. Tourism is very important in South Florida. 2012 was a record-breaking year. We don't have a lot of very good, precise information on tourism in Homestead, but clearly it's growing, and the number of people passing through is very important. The trick with a project like this is how to capture those travelers and to make Homestead and using the Seminole Theater a destination for travelers coming through South Dade and South Florida. So in summary, we would characterize the market as being somewhat limited for what we would think of as traditional performing arts programming, but a large and strong market for non-traditional entertainment and popular programming. We would also stress the importance of informal programs, arts education for all ages, and programs that are reflective of the cultural and regional cultural identities. So you can and should focus on local and South Miami-Dade County residents. Then we looked at user demand. We've issued surveys to a number of organizations. So far we've collected 4. We're still working on the balance. But the answers are quite uniform across the groups. Most of them are using facilities that are not true performing arts facilities. They're generally not satisfied with what they have available to them now. They're all interested in new and improved performance space, and they're looking for things like better dance floors, larger stage, technology, public parking. I was here last month and conducted a fairly extensive set of interviews with individuals that we could track down. We found a number of other key potential users, the most important one being Miami-Dade College, and they are ready and willing to come into the Seminole Theater now for a set of existing programs. So without any change or new programs here, they will come in and use that building actively as a classroom and a little bit for rehearsal and performance. But they have a demand for space that exists now that they're not able to meet in their current facilities. We've talked to them about rental rates and their ability to come into the building, and they're very enthusiastic about doing that. We reaffirmed that in a meeting there again this morning. There are a range of other groups that are interested in coming in, some fairly stable, well-organized groups, and others sort of the typical small cultural organizations that sort of come and go over the time. But they need spaces that have better sort of amenities. Clearly, for many of these groups, affordable rental fees are a necessity. We need to do something, sort of have Spanish language programming. And we also identified in these meetings the need for additional meeting and special event spaces. This is a summary of demand. The biggest single user is Miami-Dade College, but you'll see there's another 12 organizations that we met with who have indicated a demand for performance space, rehearsal space, and classroom space in the building. Then we've done an inventory of facilities throughout the southern part of the county. Here you are at the southern edge of that. This is my favorite graphic. It's a matrix that shows all of the current facilities in South Dade. And on the vertical axis is our measure of quality. So we've looked at all these buildings and rated them according to 8 different attributes of quality. Acoustics, performer amenities, backstage amenities, suitability for various types of programs, staff support, and so on. So we feel there's a reasonable sort of expression of quality, and then the horizontal axis is capacity. The colors, the orange ones are within 15 miles, the purple ones are local Homestead, and the yellow ones are out into the 30-mile radius. And the size of the dot is an indication of how many different types of events a particular building serves. So a small dot only does one thing well. For example, it's just for music. A large dot is more of a multi-purpose building that serves lots of different disciplines. It's a tremendous amount of work to make a simple point, which is simply, you see with the circle there, we feel there's a significant gap for higher quality mid-sized facilities in the region that could be served by the renovated Seminole Theater. Similar similar matrix. This is the same set of facilities. The difference here is that we're showing availability. So for all these buildings, if they're available, there's a high level of availability for rent, it's a light color. If there's low availability, it's a dark color. Again, to make the point that there's very few local and regional facilities with relatively good or high availability for local arts organizations. So again, a gap that we can fill. We also identified this need for meeting and event facilities, inventorying currently what you have. There's a mix of hotels and event halls. None can host an event of more than 400 people. Most have only one meeting room, and they all have limited access or limited technological capabilities. So in conclusion, we feel that the demand and supply issues confirm the feasibility of reactivating the theater. The market is large and has capacity to support more events, but you have to do things that are authentic to the diverse community and affordable given the price sensitivity in the market. There is demand for more better facilities on the part of groups, and clearly the Seminole is a unique venue in terms of its size and type and potential quality. And finally, there is a tremendous opportunity we see to serve the city's larger goals around community and economic development. So we recommend that you continue the renovation of the building, you develop a program for the local community, you partner to the extent that you can with Miami-Dade College, you outfit the building with good technology, good food and beverage services, and higher quality acoustics, and you bring it to life with a combination of rentals, presenting activity, film, and lots of educational programs. Someone should be thinking to themselves, what does that mean then? How does the building come to life? So it will be a very interesting mix of some sort of traditional performing arts programs, sort of live theater. It's not big enough for Broadway. Please don't expect Phantom of the Opera to come to Homestead anytime soon. It's for smaller shows, for music, dance, theater, folkloric programs, contemporary and alternative music, and lots of education programs. So it's a place where every kid who goes to high school in this part of the county should aspire to come and perform. The last part of our work has been to build a pro forma operating budget. So we made assumptions that you're going to get a 425-seat theater out of this. And then there's 2 rehearsal rooms in the current plan and 2 additional classrooms. So we set rental rates for those, and very importantly, we set those rates to be very inexpensive for local nonprofit organizations. So these are rental rates for some of the other buildings in South Dade, particularly the South Miami-Dade Cultural Center. We wanted this building to be a better deal for local nonprofit organizations than many of the other buildings serving the market area. On that basis, we projected activity, performances, and use days in the theaters, rehearsal spaces, and classrooms. So you'll see that in the first year, if you could get it open by 2016, there's 23,000 people coming in the building over the course of a year, generating ticket sales of 100,000 and rent of over 200,000. On that basis, we built the rest of a pro forma operating budget. You spend a little bit of money in 2015 to start to prepare for operations, in 2016. So we projected earned income with ticket sales and so on, then operating expenses in order to identify an annual funding requirement. And that number in the opening year is about $473,000, which starts to decrease a little bit in each of the following years. So you're effectively covering about 2/3 of your operating budget with earned income, which we feel is a good target, given that you've got these other secondary spaces which can do a lot of sort of meeting and event business to drive earned income. So an important question for you is that then the amount of money that the city has to come forward with? At the request of staff, we went out and looked at some other buildings in Florida just to confirm the fact that even though city-owned and sometimes city-operated buildings, the public sector funding is important, there are always significant opportunities to bring the private sector in as a funder of the building on an ongoing basis. And certainly it's one thing to pay for the renovation of the building. The more important financial challenge is ongoing financial sustainability. So here's the Old School Square in Delray Beach, city-owned, private nonprofit operated, public sector funding on an annual basis, $563,000, but the private sector contribution to that is another $468,000. Up in Largo, and in fact this was a project I wrote the original feasibility study for, I think in 1994, 466-seat theater, city-owned, Parks and Rec operated. The public puts in $533,000. The private sector adds another $378,000. And then up in Cocoa, another sort of historic theater, close to 600 seats. The public puts in $300,000. The private sector adds another $700,000. This is a more expensive theater because it's actually a producing company in the building. So you're paying for the putting on shows as well as the building itself. I want to stress for you also that your investment in the building, both the capital and the ongoing, delivers significant value back to you as a community. So 25,000 audience members coming to the building. We know from national statistics that people from within the area, when they go to a performance, they spend an average of $17 in addition to their ticket price, and hopefully that money goes into the downtown. People who are coming from outside the area, they spend an additional $53 in addition to their ticket price. So very significant additional economic activity. Then you have the impact of additional youthful attenders. Say if you have Miami-Dade College in there running classes and programs in the building, bringing that sort of youthful activity into downtown. Then you have this project as a catalyst for the development of a cultural district. You have the great park next door with the band shell, and I think additional opportunities to develop other cultural pieces up and down that block. And finally, the building can be a catalyst for a cultural tourism plan to help you make downtown Homestead into a destination for visitors. So our next steps we're sort of finishing up these operating plans, continuing to sort of pull together the surveys to give you a final report. We would urge you to advance your discussions with Miami-Dade College and see how they want to come into the project as a partner. Then there's some work to do to update your renovation plan and budget, and which then prepares you to go into a capital campaign plan to confirm that the money is in place to complete the renovation of the project. And hopefully then this gives you, not too far from now, the reanimated Seminole Theater, a vibrant part of your downtown and of your community. Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
One point I wanted to mention, which is when you look at a 400-something seat theater, it's going to be very hard to find any theater across the country of that size that pays its own way. It's really a community amenity which you would expect if you had a swimming pool or a park or whatever else. There's costs associated with it, and trying to shrink that gap of what they need to operate it and what you can get from the private sector is really the magic to try to minimize the burden to the community. And so that's also what we're going to be looking to see, how realistic is that in order to shrink that down. And also, as Duncan develops the operating plan, is there a scaled down model that would shrink that dollar amount so that we have less of a gap to cover? And so Duncan's going to be working on that as well. I can tell you that When Duncan made his projections 11 years ago for the White Plains Performing Arts Center, we knew walking in the door that there was going to be a gap, and it was a decision made by all that this was an important amenity for the community. And I can tell you for 11 years, that gap has always been there, and they've always found a way to fill the gap. But there was a commitment to having it, and it was also, 11 years later, it's still in existence. And a theater like this is really no magic bullet in terms of, geez, I wonder how to make it profitable. I don't think there's any scenario where this theater would be profitable, and most theaters of this size would be profitable. The question is, how much value do you get, and also what's your rate of return as you factor in the other economic development spin-offs from an operation like this.
So the operational costs are you're fairly comfortable with the operational cost. Just don't have the realistic idea of what the offset numbers would be.
Two big concerns I would have, and this is probably a much larger discussion in the future, which is, what is the operational model? Does the city run it? Does a nonprofit organization run it? Does a for-profit organization run it? And then the other question is, if the city runs it, is the city committed to running it like a business where everybody has to pay their way? Because, as you know, if you waive all the fees, then at the end of the day, your gap is going to be much larger.
Any questions from council? Mr. Burgess?
How many employees would you anticipate would be needed to staff this facility correctly?
I think in the current budget there's 5 full-time and another few, there's other additional part-time staff in the box office and backstage.
And then, because I'm not, so then you would hire more people as a production came in, or they bring people, because I'm not familiar how exactly that would.
So there's full-time staff, then there would be part-time staff.
And then my question would be, all the part-time staff and stuff, there's some those numbers are in your projections?
Yes, sir.
With no parking downtown, how do you see us bringing the numbers in to be able to fill the facility without anywhere in the near future of parking to go with it?
No parking is a big issue, and getting people to come to this building should force you to address that fairly soon.
So was that taken into consideration now that there is no parking, or this was done with the assumption that there is parking and plenty of parking for everybody?
Our hope would be that there would be sufficient parking close enough. I mean, you don't have to build a parking garage connected to it, but you'll have to do at some point a study to confirm that there are enough places near enough.
But you're assuming, with your numbers and all your material that you presented tonight, you're assuming that that's all available at the time?
We're assuming that parking is not an impediment.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Anyone else? What is it that you're looking for, Mr. Manager?
We're not looking for anything. This was just a preliminary report, so you can kind of get a sense of where we're headed with this thing. Some of you had concerns as the item was placed on for a referendum that you wanted to see if there was anything major here that you needed to worry about in the event you wanted to pull it off. And we wanted to make sure you had the information as we got it, so that you could make those decisions if need be. Other than that, Duncan will be back once we have the final report. And in the meantime, if you have any other additional concerns or questions, we're happy to look at anything that you need. And that's it. We don't really need any decisions at this time.
One question, if I might. I know you've been doing some research and trying to find potential users, additional users for the facility, somewhat like you have with Miami-Dade College. So what do you think your opportunity is still? I mean, I know you're not finished. Do you think that there's still opportunities out there for us to offset the cost of operations?
So I think, right. So the problem with these buildings is, in fact, the more of these nonprofit users you get, the more it costs you to sustain the building. Because the fundamental economic problem is the rent that they can afford to pay to come in the building is nowhere near a market rent. So we've identified a bunch of those nonprofit users, and we're trying to be very conservative about what they can afford to pay, and we will hopefully identify additional users. But solving the economic problem in my mind, is really about what's the value proposition that the building offers to the community. And that value proposition has an earned income component, so how it drives the meeting and event business, and how it attracts promoters who want to bring their touring product to the building, because that will help. And also the sort of the contributed income component, how the building drives economic development and community development, and how that makes you and the private sector feel more comfortable about the annual investment that you make in the building.
Mayor, one other point as far as the nonprofits and who's going to use this. What we've learned from past experience is that nonprofits come and go in terms of their commitment to usage. Some of it's money driven, some of it is whatever else. And our first run at this, there was a bunch of groups that said they were going to use it, and then there was some conflict because they didn't like the operator. Next thing you know, they didn't even walk into the place. But other people stepped up to the plate because they saw an opportunity to use it. And so whatever this list is today is likely it'll be a different list when the theater opens up. And then the other piece to this is the management of the theater is going to be crucial, because if it's not well run and if it's run like a social institution, I think you could run into big trouble in terms of meeting your projections. So that's going to be a very important thing to discuss in the future of how this thing needs to be run in order for it to be successful.
You want to say something, John? Mr. Burgess?
And this may be too detailed a question, but what would an average ticket cost for a citizen, you know, on an average show that you think would come in there, and
Right.
and would that fit into what we think our income level is here?
Right. So there's a big range, of course, but we've kept the, you know, so for touring product up at, say, sort of South Miami-Dade, there are a lot of shows up there where the average ticket is, you know, $40 to $50. We're trying to keep the average ticket price down $25 to $30 for presented events, and we've got a lot of also built in sort of a film program with sort of a low ticket price there as well, because that price sensitivity is very important, I think.
One question with regards to, we've had the discussion about parking, and you found funding sources in the case of building a parking garage. The question is, we don't really know where it would be yet. The question still remains as to the PD. If you use that, any facility, any location there, I know we still have, I know there is a parking area right across the street from Mitchell's. It's a little triangle place that at one point CRA was looking at doing an elevated garage there. Still, that's, you know, that's a little bit of a walk away from the theater, but, you know, it does draw, it does pull the two streets together. It pulls Washington and Chrome together. So at the end of the day, I guess the point is, if we could coalesce around a location, there is a funding process where we could build parking, which we've identified as a need anyway, correct?
Correct. And if you looked at this as if a major movie theater chain was going to try to build a business somewhere in the country and spend millions of dollars and open up a theater, if you told them, open up your theater but put your garage 2-3 blocks away, they wouldn't go there. And so it's a function of consumer behavior as well. So you really need to be very careful about the location if you want to maximize the success of the theater. So having the garage across the street is a huge benefit to the theater. I wouldn't make that decision until we hear from the iconic attraction consultant to see how close we are potentially to have a funder for that, and how much parking they would need and how much of that they would take care of itself. But in terms of the parking for the theater, we know from the parking study that we need about 180 spaces, and having that across the street from the garage, from the theater, obviously makes a big difference.
Ms. Faircloth, anything? Mr. Williams, anything? Vice Mayor? John again?
Yeah, thank you. There's a property right next door, a nightclub, that doesn't have the best of reputations, you know, and goes on during the night. Have we looked at possibly having to buy that person out to make this successful, or what would be a plan as we move forward for that piece of property? Because I think that's a big piece of it also there. To you know, as he said, you know, the people have to feel safe. They want to come there and be able to walk around and all.
we've got several things to look at with that parking garage retail project, and that is, what's our total footprint? How do you make that as contiguous of a site as possible? What are our historic issues that we need to address? What can be torn down, what can't be torn down, and what can be acquired, and how much would it cost, and whether that's a doable number. In an ideal world, to own that whole block would be very favorable, particularly if we have the whole ground floor as, you know, a big box or a combination. The hope would be that once we know how many square feet we have on that first floor, and if it's as large and contiguous as possible, that helps us with our marketing effort to try to find a national brand.
Have we had any preliminary discussions with that property owner as we move forward? Because I would hate to see us get the $5 million and start this project and then get held hostage over there at the end, too.
Right. We feel fairly confident that we can build a garage and build around that if need be. In an ideal scenario, we have the whole block. But there's so much space behind that there's plenty of space for a garage.
John, you're talking about the
Hayes
Champagne
nightclub or whatever it is right there.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the area by the PD, where the existing PD is. He's talking to the
I'm
north.
talking adjacent to the theater,
No,
right there.
no, I'm sorry.
Because I think that would be an important piece of property for the city to look at.
We can start.
I would like to see some preliminary numbers if we could, just to see.
Your concern is that that particular business would have an impact on the theater.
Yeah, I think if we were to talk to the PD, you would see that they get quite a few calls out there, and that crowd generally comes probably when a theater would be letting out, so they would be, you know, and they seem to be kind of loud there, so I don't know if the soundproofing would be good enough so that it wouldn't interfere with shows or whatever was going on next door too. And as we look, you know, that may be able to something we can expand into. That might be large enough where we could put some retail or make some kind of configuration on that side of the road for a parking garage also, or some, you know, so that they're adjoined right there or something. So I think I just, you know, I think as we look, we need to look at every opportunity down there, not stay focused on just the theater, but we need to make sure that we have the facilities that are going to go with it and what's going to be around it, because that's going to be a key to the success also.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Councilman Burgess stated, because I had the same thought the other day, and that is, you know, I know a lot of the redevelopment of downtowns, part of what they do is they do buy up property cheap, you know, when things are at the bottom, and then either resell that property when the land turns around. By the time the theater gets there, the economic contraction and some of these other things, the property values go up, and then if the city's still holding the property, they resell it to the developer for a higher end use. And so it would be good, while we're talking about redevelopment of the downtown, to possibly look into that option. You know, could we acquire that particular building at this stage, either for a particular plan in the future, or whether it just be to buy in hopes of renovate and revitalize later. So I think that would be a good idea for future planning.
Sure, no problem.
John, go ahead.
One more, and this would be towards our attorney. Richard, because we have such a forgiving council up here, and we give, when people come and ask for fees to be waived. Talk about
yourself. Don't talk about me.
When we ask for waiving of fees, we generally say yes to nonprofits. And a majority of the listed possible tenants or users, however you want to categorize it, would be, or nonprofits. Is there something that we could build in where that waiver of fees wouldn't be allowed, or that, so that we as a council wouldn't be beat upon and put in a tough position?
You could, I think the best way to do that would be to pass an ordinance that says that that we're not going to waive fees. I mean, you could apply it.
So there is a possibility of doing so. I mean, we're not
ultimately,
looking for the answer
if you really wanted to, you could pass an amendment to the ordinance, but you could do anything by saying it like it takes a unanimous vote, or that they will not be.
Yeah, but then you put one guy out there on the end of the diving board by himself.
It could also be a moot point if you make a decision on the governance issues. You have an outside operator do it, in which case then it would be out of your authority anyway.
But I think that's an important thing, because as we know, this board changes every couple of years. There's different people up here that have different feelings, and I think that as we look at the long-term success, that would be an important thing, because obviously the city is going to be held responsible for that money, and it could escalate to whatever it ended up to be if there's not some kind of mechanism put in place to guard the city and its taxpayers against that.
If I may, this is an issue that we run into on a lot of our projects with municipally owned buildings. We've made a provision in the operating budget for what we're calling a rental allowance, such that groups in the community can apply for a break on their rental rates. We believe it's very important that rental rates should be sort of fixed and public and sort of everybody knows what they are, but then you can create a provision whereby some groups can apply for some sort of a reduction or special provision without it becoming a universal thing. So that's the way we've handled it in a number of communities.
And a follow-up to, so what would you do then? You would allot that out quarterly, because somebody may not know in January that they're going to have a show in October,
Right.
Yet you've already given all your money away in January and February that you had allotted.
Right. So all we've done now in the operating budget is we've created a $10,000 allowance, an annual allowance to allow you to reduce rents for particular groups who apply and receive sort of approval to do that.
On the other hand, it does pose the potential of a slippery slope once you start doing it. And so you really have to figure out what kind of operation you want, because one policy decision is we want it to run like a social institution, and it's a community amenity, and we don't care what the gap is, and we're committed to funding that gap. So it really depends on philosophy here and how much money you're willing to spend to keep this thing open.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Do you have anything, Vice Mayor? No?
No, I think the question that I had, or the comment I had, was discussed, and that is that a lot of this may self-regulate as far as if we end up having an outside operator come in and we just lease it to the operator, then they would make all these decisions, and we as the council would have no say in it, so it would take it off, the burden off of our shoulders, and we, in that respect. So that is an option, but that's more, I guess, down the line, right? Once we get past the funding mechanism portion of it, then the operational portion comes in as far as how we're going to structure that.
Yeah, you really want to have a much larger discussion on the question of the
Yes.
pros and cons of the different ways these theaters operate. As he showed from some of these other theaters, they all run a little differently, and there's different models, and some are better than others, and some cities want to be able to dictate what goes on in the theater and what kind of shows we're going to run, and other cities say, I don't want to make a decision on whether we should run Nutcracker this Christmas or not, because don't have the expertise. Our Parks Department may not necessarily have the expertise for that. And then on the other hand, by sending it out to a group to do it, you may not like their programming choices. So for a period of time, whatever your agreement is, you may have to, hold your nose. I can tell you one of the first shows that knocked on the door in White Plains was Vagina Monologues, and people were very upset about it. But it was a city facility. But on the other hand, the city didn't have to make that decision because that wasn't our programming decision.
Right. Okay.
You've got a final report coming back to us, right?
Duncan, when do you expect a report?
The next version should be ready in a week or so.
Great.
Week or so? Okay, so you don't need any direction from council if everybody's clear. So we'll move on to new business. No new business? None? Any item 5, 6 reports? Public comments? Anyone from the public that would like to speak on the CRA, to the CRA board? None? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay, all in favor? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.